gentlemen, and welcome back to Gamblecast. My name is Richard Delaney, and I'm your host for today, and I'm joined by a very special guest. Chase Wassenar is with us today. He's a writer and social media specialist for Unicorn. Am I pronouncing that right, Chase? Unicorn?
Unicorn, absolutely.
Unicorn.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. Really excited to get you on. So Chase, for anybody who is joining us, Chase has a deep history, a deep affinity for esports and recently betting with Unicorn. So we're going to have a quick chat today about esports and betting, something that I have titled A Match Made in Heaven. I want to start off with that, Chase. Would you agree with that? Is esports and betting, do you think that they kind of can coexist, or are they something that work well together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at esports and competitive video gaming, a lot of these same storylines, a lot of the same factors and personalities and things that you would expect that become such interesting storylines in traditional sports are all there in competitive video gaming. And you already have an audience that is so built into having this online presence. That's where they go to watch the games. That's where they go to talk about the games. And of course, that's where most of them go to gamble on the games. So I think that, anything, there's the fun of trying to find the holes in the odds and trying to find that extra amount of value in whatever game it is that you're trying to bet on, because there are so many different esports titles out there. It's a very fun place to be right now, especially as it's still a young industry compared to some of these other traditional sports. And you can have a game like Fortnite that's been around for just a few months from an esports perspective, but has this huge community backing behind it and can transform into this big thing overnight. That is a fascinating space to be in, and one that I think continuously challenges those who are looking to get that edge from a betting perspective, that I think is a ton of fun.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that looking at esports, I guess that one of the things that I've noticed with anybody I know who is an esports fan, such as yourself, there's always that moment, I guess, where things change from being just a gamer to becoming a fan of actually watching this these sports like CS:GO, League of Legends, whatnot. What was there like a kind of a defining moment for you with esports where you kind of said, oh, this is actually really fun to watch, and not just play games all the time, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I've been a gamer since I was very little, so that was always something that has been a big part of my life. But as far as esports go, I didn't really get into it until about 2012. That was my sophomore year of university. And honestly, it came from the fact that growing up in Atlanta, I'd been a Falcons fan for forever, right? I had season tickets from 98 to 2011. Traditional sports were a huge part of my life, and I was watching these things all the time. But for university, I was actually in a program that sent me to the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. So I studied there for the last 3 years of my university. And they don't really show Falcons games in your average pub, believe it or not. It's not really, obviously, the games that I was used to aren't necessarily as big over here. And so I wanted something that I could watch and be able to engage in and enjoy no matter where I was in the world. Something that had all of the things I loved about sports, but had this ability to engage with it and consume it at my leisure, have some flexibility on that, and be able to follow in a way that allows me to talk with my friends both over in Europe and my friends back at home. And esports does all of that, specifically League of Legends, because that was the game that I had been playing the most of what I like to call the big four now of esports, and then all the kind of other smaller games that have each carved a niche for themselves as well. But really, it was a merger of two things that I had loved my entire life, just coming together perfectly in that moment. And it's been a love that has stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my thing with esports is I will be the first to admit that I'm not necessarily the biggest esports fan in the world. I have watched a little bit in the past, but the thing that I really like about it, and definitely it definitely works in this way for a betting perspective, is it's the fact that the accessibility, like you're saying, for in terms of an esports game. So let's say, for example, League of Legends. It's this idea that while a competition is on, fans come on, they watch online, and there's something that's very it's very different compared to sports. That's interesting about the competitive side of the game. And I think that, it's this idea that people can all come together at the same time from different places, like you're saying, and, be in the same sort of portal, whether you're watching through Twitch or whatever else. There's something that's kind of, dare I say, special about being able to do that. Like, it's a community where everybody, it's kind of a little bit more human, I guess, at times. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to not just what we see on the stage, but also what we see off the stage, right? Like a lot of people that really got into the esports side of things got there because their favorite streamers, their favorite YouTube personalities who were playing at this super high level got into the professional side of things. And so you look like at a team like Cloud9, for instance. They are an organization with teams in a bunch of different games. But in League of Legends, they have a North American team with this guy Sneaky on it. And Sneaky is probably one of the 5 most successful Twitch streamers for League of Legends that we have out there. Just a guy who is a very fun personality, a very meme-heavy stream, loves to kind of goof around on that side of things. And, a lot of Cloud9 fans are really Sneaky fans. They're people that saw this guy, loved him as an individual, and the kind of behind the scenes look that you get by spending that much time with a player on stream for however many days a week that some of these guys do. Usually during the actual season, there's less, but still some presence out there to directly reach these fans and engage with them. And there's an accessibility there that I think creates a more personal atmosphere for people that choose to engage with the scene that way. You look at the kind of content that a lot of these teams put out. Behind the scenes shows are very common. Most teams, I would say, have some sort of video series where they, put together these packages of what their practices look like behind the scenes and how these players all bounce off of each other and capturing some of the hyper moments of a game day for them. There's just this kind of personal touch to esports because of where it is right now and the accessibility that just being a almost purely internet thing is that has really resonated with a lot of people in a way that has been fascinating to watch, but is definitely going to be something that is interesting as we continue to move forward and as things become more and more professional and we start getting a better sense of what is and is not the most efficient way of doing things. It's a very interesting attitude and culture that comes from this more personal touch that we see with some of these things.
Do you think that, from your experience, have you noticed just in terms of the audience and the fan base for different games, and you're saying there that people come in to supporting a team at times because they support a specific personality, or they might have been attached to that person on Twitch or YouTube or whatever it was, and that's how they kind of get fed into maybe supporting that esports team or watching them. Do you ever notice that the fan bases are kind of like divided, or maybe they argue a bit more than you would see in other, say, like sports?
I don't want to say argue more than traditional sports because I've been to enough pubs to know those debates can get very heated over a football match. But I will say that anything on the internet, add anonymity and then have your typical debate, you're going to get some people that kind of, get very intense about certain things. I do think that some of the things that we could say about gaming culture as a whole that need to be kind of worked upon. I think what we're seeing is people stepping up from within teams and within leagues as a whole to kind of bring in a more welcoming environment for everybody. I know Blizzard for the Overwatch League just did a huge event for Pride Month that they were very happy with. They just raised a whole bunch of money through an in-game skin for a charity for breast cancer research. There are tons of stories like that that I think embrace the positives of what the community can be and how people who maybe don't always feel like they can find a place to really be themselves and enjoy some of the nerdier aspects of this, to engage with it and feel like part of this larger community. But right now we're seeing this kind of upswing where it is becoming more popularized. It is becoming more of a regular thing. And I think eventually we're going to be treating these kind of arguments and engaging with the community in a very similar way to what you see in traditional sports now. I think we're moving more and more in that direction, which is just fascinating to watch as we see different types of investors making different decisions in how that's going to take place.
It's interesting that you say that esports and sports you maybe think are going to become a little bit more aligned, I guess, and become similar. It's interesting to think that maybe 5-10 years ago, I'm not sure on the specifics, that was kind of probably an unheard of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you look in the world, to be honest with you, because in South Korea, they've been doing this for a very long time. Ever since StarCraft Brood War back in the early 90s, they have had professional gamers. They have multiple television channels dedicated purely to esports. On GameNet, OGN is the most popular one, but they've got a couple others as well. And for them, this has been something they've been working on for 20 and 30 years, and it shows because they kick our ass in just about everything that they play. So you look at a culture there that's really embraced it and has some factors just in their overall culture in which they're very receptive to listening to coaches and kind of embracing, the dedication and work ethic that it takes to succeed at this kind of high level play. And because they've been doing it for so long, it's become more normalized in Korea. You can see esports pros hanging out with your celebrities and your models and your whatever else. They are treated as if they are these big stars because they are, because it is huge in that country. And in China, we're seeing a lot of that as well. China obviously just has a ton of people. So any percentage of people getting really invested in the game is going to have a huge count on our view numbers. But I mean, to put a number on that, for the League of Legends finals last year, the finals had 57.6 million unique viewers.
Yeah,
which is an insane number. But that's really where we're getting. These regions are embracing esports, and it is becoming more kind of officialized and recognized at the same level that their traditional sports would be. Here in the West, we've still got a bit of work to do. Germany has certainly made a lot of great advances in that area. I think the US is starting to get there. They do a lot better with console stuff. So they kind of have a different scene that sprouted in a different direction because of what that gaming culture happened to be, and how people kind of built their love of gaming around. But I do think when you look at the types of companies that are getting invested, right? In League of Legends, they just did franchising this year, so we just got a whole bunch of new teams. Well, who were those new teams? Well, it was 100 Thieves, who were owned by the Cleveland Cavaliers. It was the Golden Guardians, who were owned by the Golden State Warriors. It was Clutch Gaming, who's owned by the Houston Rockets. It's Optic, who I believe is owned by a fuel magnate. You're looking at a lot of these really high-end investors who are bringing a professionalism to what they do that I think is going to become the new standard in a lot of ways as to how these things are treated. And I think in that way, certainly we're going to be becoming more and more like traditional sports, with that added extra level of engagement that you get because it's on the internet, because your favorite players stream, because they can release these YouTube videos directly to their audience. That's very interesting to see.
And isn't that part of it as well, is that, the the personality that we spoke about. If you're following somebody, a lot of the time people will follow these personalities kind of from the ground up, and so there's that extra layer of kind of, I guess, loyalty. If I'm watching Arsenal play at the weekend, and I hear that they've signed a new player from France or whatever, I say, oh, that's super interesting. I get to kind of understand what he plays like, and I support him over the season. But in esports, a lot of the time, people are being introduced to esports in a kind of a little bit more of a roundabout way, that perhaps there's a deeper sort of kind of like fan appreciation, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how different companies are handling that side of things, because I think different companies have very different philosophies. If you look at League of Legends, their esports scene is very much at the center of how they present themselves. If you go into the game's client, they have a tab dedicated to esports, where you can kind of watch games from in there. They advertise all of the big events, so they kind of, they make the community, even if you're just on the most casual level, they want you to know that this is out there, that there's this high level play that you can enjoy and digest. And Valve is the very same way with Dota 2, where they offer an in-game item that is specifically designed to be interacted with in relation to their big tournaments. So you kind of can wager some in-game items that you have on the results of certain matches, and if you win, you'll get an even more valuable one back. So there are a lot of things like that that they really do to promote the esports scene in a less roundabout way, to try to make that connection between player to viewer more direct. And then you look at Blizzard and what they've done for Overwatch, and this has been a peculiar choice. I'm not sure it's one that I would personally take, but their main Overwatch channel has not mentioned the current Overwatch League playoffs at all. Hasn't been brought up. They've separated their casual channel from their esports channel, and there isn't really a lot of cross promotion between the two. Some would say that points to the fact that Overwatch in general has a little bit more of a casual player base overall. But it's certainly interesting to see that some companies are really making their esports scene a priority, something they want to invest significantly in. In Epic Games' case with Fortnite, $100 million in.
I saw that. Yeah, that's for the World Championships, right, or something like that, or a World Cup, or
yeah, it's the years worth of competitive events that are all going to be leading up to the World Championship sometime in mid 2019. Though that just happened, and they've got a little bit of work to do on their infrastructure side of it. But certainly, I do think it's going to be very interesting to see how different companies really do embrace trying to get that more direct interaction between their playing community and the esports community, versus trying to acknowledge essentially that not everyone is going to be interested in esports. So let's kind of give each their own space. It's a very interesting debate, I think, that developers as a whole are still very much figuring out.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I want to talk a little bit. I want to move on to Fortnite in a second. We'll have a bit more of a conversation on that. I just want to talk about the betting side of esports for a second. And I want to know, do you think that there are any, just from your experience as a writer and from being online and doing social media for Unicorn, do you think that there are any apparent differences between, because Unicorn, to give a little bit more context, is an esports only bookie. So the community I'm guessing that you deal with are heavy esports fans. Do you think that there's probably a difference between an esports bettor and a regular sports bettor?
Yeah, so I don't work with the bookmakers directly at Unicorn, so I don't have any actual stats or numbers behind some of the things that I've seen. But in my understanding and just in my experience as a bettor, I think the ability to engage with every side of esports all in one place is what makes Unicorn different, right? Like, we're not just a bookie. We also have a huge content page, so people can go to our articles. They can read, the latest news story about a roster move that some team made, or here's our analysis on some big trade that just happened, and what does this mean for each team? And you can kind of everything you digest, from the game to the content around it, to the community type things, whether it be like our jackpot system where you can engage with and potentially win some items for your in-game stuff, or just any level of community forums and whatnot. And then the betting, it's all in this one online sphere that I think people are very familiar with. It's one of the reasons that Unicorn has looked into the crypto side of things, because people in the demographics that we are talking about, again, I don't have any numbers because I'm not officially on that side of it, but I can tell you that overall we've seen reports that crypto is becoming more and more popular with that kind of younger community that is now turning into this next wave of esports bettors that allows them to engage with it in that kind of way as well. I think that what we're really seeing, and this is going to be the fascinating thing, right, is because this esports audience is a bit younger, this has the potential to be a great way for casinos to draw in an audience that right now, given the numbers that we've seen, some casinos are struggling with. It can be hard to get young people to come in and engage with things like slot machines. That's not something, like, I don't know anyone in my personal life who does that. I think in general, that's something that has become less popular to engage with. But esports is something that would draw in the same people that maybe would not be interested in some of the things surrounding betting now, are now engaging with esports and are finding this competitive atmosphere and getting to that side of it from a betting perspective in a new and different way. So it's certainly, I think, I would love to, it'll be interesting to see how those numbers develop and how different sites, including ours, adjust accordingly. But right now, I think more than anything else, just being able to digest everything all in one place and enjoy it and interact with it directly just adds this extra element of community to it, and really emphasizes this thing that feels unique to esports, because there is this feeling that what's happening in esports right now is something special. And I think people that are getting into it, whatever side it's on, even if it's the betting side, I think for sure can feel that.
Okay, cool. I want to move back into the fast lane here. I want to talk about Fortnite in a little bit more detail with you, Chase, because I'll tell you, I'm a Fortnite player. I play it recreationally with my friends. I enjoy it, have a good time, like millions of others are at the moment. But I'll tell you what, I struggle, and I'm not just playing devil's advocate here. I do struggle to see how Fortnite is going to become an esports title, and maybe you could help shine a little bit light. And I'll tell you why. The reason I struggle is because of you've got like battle royale games that have 100 players. How is esports going about accommodating that at the moment, or planning to accommodate it, I should say?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Epic Games has announced some, but not all of the details. So some of this stuff is going to be developing, and we'll have to see how they adjust to what they're getting and their experience as they kind of try different things. Fortnite has come in with the mentality that all of the game modes, all of the ways in which a player can typically engage with a game of Fortnite are valid. So they're trying to have events that apply to each of those game modes. So you can have solo events, you can have duo events. The last one they just did was a duo event. And eventually they're going to do some squad events as well, though it sounds like solos and duos are going to be where the majority of this stuff comes in. We do have to look at a game for comparison in terms of having to switch in between player perspectives to try to catch all of the action. You can point to a game like CSGO, which is so huge in Europe and has a significant presence in North America as well, where the idea, that's a 5v5 tactical game in which You'll jump around from angle to angle to kind of show where these defenses are happening, where the attackers are moving to rotate to try to get a flank in, and all those things. So I do think that there are ways to do that. I do agree that the number of players in a traditional Fortnite game make it fascinating because there's just so many different places. There's so many different fights that are going to be going on at the same time, especially in the early game. But as things kind of center down, I think that if we learned anything from the Fortnite in the Park E3 event that they did, I think that there's definitely an audience for it. And there's definitely a lot of people who get very excited about engaging with that. To give you an idea, that event in particular was a 30 duos of celebrities and pros playing together for a $3 million charity pot. So that was only down to 60 players, which is still a lot, but 30 duos is a little bit more manageable than 100 single players. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of temper in the pure number of players from that kind of 100 that people might be used to. But the exact details of that are still unclear. They're still unfolding right now. All we know is that Epic Games are throwing $100 million at the competitive scene because they want to be a top-tier esport now while the game is still very popular, because no one wants to do what PUBG did, which is get really popular and then stall out because the game got popular way quicker than you thought, and you don't know how to really shift and allocate resources to adjust for that. And now suddenly Fortnite comes in and becomes the game of that genre. So I think it's great that Fortnite is taking, kind of seizing the opportunity, and certainly throwing this much money at the scene is unprecedented. We have not seen any major esport put up the sheer volume of prize money. To give you an idea for comparison, the largest esports tournament in terms of prize pool is Dota 2's International, which last year had a prize pool of about 24.5 million, if I remember correctly. So 24.5 million, that's a lot of money. 100 million is a lot of money. And it's going to be very, it's going to be interesting to see how much that drives up player involvement, how much that drives players that might be engaging professionally in other esports, but maybe you're like, well, I'm not the best at this anymore. And oh, look, here's this Fortnite thing. I can kind of transition all the skills that made me a good professional in my game and now go play this because there's so much more upside for these kind of things. If they can sort out the format a little bit and kind of refine that down, which I think is just going to take time as they try out certain things. And if they can fix some of the technical difficulties that unfortunately plagued a lot of their first event, I think that it has the potential to be very special. But it is going to take some real work on the spectating side of things, some real work on kind of refining the format down to the thing that will work the greatest for as a spectator esport, and seeing where they go from there. It's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely. I was thinking about this before the podcast, and I was thinking, it's the sort of thing where I guess what you say about having this sort of kind of tempered down specific esports maybe sort of mode, because it's difficult for me to visualize with I think of Fortnite as 100 players screaming at each other, 55 of them are 9-year-olds running around, kind of headless chicken sort of situation. But I think it's going to be interesting for esports fans to keep an eye on, and definitely for anybody who's like esports betting as well, because that's the sort of market. The amount of variables in a game of Fortnite is very interesting to me. It's and also I guess you've got that whole thing of they're still constantly making changes to the game at the moment. It's I know they do the same for other esports as well, but it's a lot of them are quite drastic. So it's definitely something for people to keep an eye on. I want to talk to you a little bit about League of Legends. So tell me about your background with that game, because we spoke a little bit before the podcast. It sounds like that's your sort of game, right? So tell me a bit about your background and how and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so League of Legends has been, it was the first esport I really got into. It was a game that I played going back to 2010 when it still, it was just came out of beta and was just becoming a thing, well before it had really blown up into the game that we know it as today. But I'd been playing it for a couple of years. And then when I got to college, like I said, I started watching it. And, I've always been a writer. I've always loved doing that and engaging with games that way. So I started my own blog, which then got me picked up by a website, which then turned into a podcast and freelance writing for that website. And I've kind of bounced around to a couple different sites since before I found this more permanent gig with Unicorn. But in between all of that, I was actually a head coach of a team that was based out of Istanbul right after I had graduated university. It was a team called Imperial Esports. We were based out of Istanbul. Like I said, we were not a professional team. We were kind of the league that was trying to become a professional team.
Right.
They have a promotion relegation system very similar to what you would be familiar with in the Premier League or a lot of different football leagues across Europe. And that was an incredible experience. You mentioned the Fortnite is changing things all the time. League of Legends has a patch every 2 weeks. So they change things on a very consistent basis, ranging from, this is a small quality of life patch. It changes a couple things that were maybe overtuned and undertuned, to, oh my God, they just changed about 8 different items all in this one set, and now 40 or 50 champions are affected. And what does this mean?
And I mean, this is the thing. Sorry to cut across you. This is the thing, when we compare esports and regular sports, right? Is regular sports don't have this kind of dynamic side of it where things can change quite often. In the World Cup this summer, they introduced VAR for football, which is the first change that's probably been implemented in 60 years or so, but to have these small changes that actually affect the gameplay, it keeps fans interested, right? It retains that sort of interest.
Yeah, certainly. And it's a conversation that's become a very interesting one in League of Legends because there was a pro player that did a video about it. There's a balance that developers have to strike, right? Because on the one hand, your number one customer base are the players, right? You need to make sure that the game is feeling fresh and fun for them, which means making changes that address the biggest issues in the game from a balance perspective, that helps promote diversity and a wide range of different play styles so that people who like all sorts of different things can feel like they can play the game and be effective. And make sure that it doesn't feel like things just stagnate, because that's the killer, is when your game is no longer doing things that are new and interesting, and here's this new game that comes along in the same genre that is trying new things. So as a developer, you always have to be aware of that. But on the other hand, for pros, constant changes can be quite rough. Obviously, having some change is really important so that you can kind of engage with this metagaming, and certain teams who have more flexible play styles can take advantage of this, right? So, let's say, I'm going to use the League of Legends example because that's the game I'm best familiar with. Let's say that big, beefy tanks are popular in the top lane. So it's a whole bunch of characters with a lot of health, a lot of defenses, don't do a lot of damage. And Riot is like, well, we're seeing the same picks in a lot of these games, so let's make items that do a little bit more attack damage and can kind of fight these tanks a little bit stronger. Let's help them out. Having that ability for a team that was playing tanks to then say, oh, well, now these new things are stronger, so let's play this new type of champion. And I have a player in the top lane that can play both of these types of champions very well. That versatility is rewarded. The ability to adjust strategically. So there's the draft phase in games like League of Legends and Dota, where teams go back and forth picking one hero at a time. And once that hero is taken, the other team can't take it. And there are also heroes that you can ban out as well before these picks start happening. So, teams that are able to kind of put together these puzzle pieces, pick things one at a time that both counter what their opponent is doing, but also come together as a cohesive team strategy that gives them a clear win condition they can play around. All of that is rewarded for teams that have coaching staffs that can analyze this stuff and have players that can have enough different types of characters that they can play, that they can adjust to these things. Those teams are rewarded for that. And I think that adds a cerebral aspect to the game.
Yeah.
And that I love, and is something that I really like to engage with as someone who's played strategy games all of his life. But it also means that sometimes a developer might make a change that came off a lot stronger than they expected, and players now have to relearn a lot of things that they were counting on to be stable based on the time and year in which that change happened. And that's where we are in League of Legends right now, where a type of character that had been played in the bot lane for basically the game's entire existence, for the last 8 years of competitive play for sure. And that type of character is not being played very much anymore because they all had their power levels significantly decreased due to changes they made that made other types of champions stronger. And so all these bot laners are like, well, I played this game for 8 years, and you told me this was the one type of character that I need to play. Variety within that character type, of course, but still that's what skill set you told me to learn. And now I'm being told, oh, well, actually, we want all these other things to be picked there too. So go out and play on solo queue and learn all these new champions in a couple weeks. That doesn't work very well, and I don't think pros necessarily enjoy that as much. So it's a balance. It's making sure that the game is fresh and fun, and that fans can engage with it, but also making sure that you're not throwing these professional players a giant wrench right before a big series that kind of adds this weird kind of shadow that hangs over the whole thing. And of course, as companies get better used to it, as they have more and more experience, I do think they learn and improve in that regard. But it's certainly a fine balance to keep, and something that makes esports very, very different than traditional sports, to say the least.
Okay, cool. So I want to talk a little bit. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, Chase. But before we do that, you host a podcast called Rough Drafts Podcast, and it's described as a free-form discussion of League of Legends. Do you maybe want to tell us a little bit about that and what you guys discuss on there?
Yeah, so the podcast is something that I've done for quite a while. It's something that I really enjoy because I grew up, loving Bill Simmons as a writer. He's a sports writer in the U.S., for those of you who don't know, who also has his own podcast, and he does something called Guess the Lines during the NFL season, where he invites Cousin Sal on to go and try to see which one of them is closest to the actual betting line. And then discuss whether that's right or wrong, or what they think the casinos are thinking about that matchup. And that's something that I have used to engage with League of Legends in the exact same way. I love kind of looking at, well, here are the games that I've seen. Here's what we know about, moves that have come up in the last couple of weeks from a roster perspective, or patch changes that have come in that would affect which teams are good at a certain thing, bad at a certain thing. As well as, just a ton of different storylines and that you have to keep up with behind the scenes, all that stuff that you kind of, keep in your back pocket when you're engaging with traditional sports as well, but is just so much more readily available to you from esports because it is more transparent in some of these other ideas. And then figuring out, well, where does that put the line? And so I think it's a fun game to play along with. I've really enjoyed engaging with it at that level and just inviting people on. There's so many great experts that I've been fortunate enough to have on my show from a bunch of different places within the esports scene, color casters, and team analysts, coaches, players, writers. I just seeing how all of them bring their own unique perspective to the game is always fun, and I just love getting to talk to people and share about this thing that I am very passionate about, and engaging in that community discussion, taking questions from them to kind of bring that holistic feel to it that I just think is a ton of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I have to say, it's been a really interesting conversation with you. We've covered quite a lot in around 40 minutes. Unfortunately, we're a little bit time constrained. I could probably talk to you for another 2 or 3 hours about the ins and outs. I want to say to anybody who's listening to go and follow Chase on Twitter at Chase Wassenar. And to make sure to check out the Rough Drafts podcast as well, if you're interested in League of Legends, for sure. I want to say thank you, Chase, for joining us. Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always love getting to talk about League of Legends, esports, all that fun stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to it at home, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Great, for sure. No, we'll definitely, if we've got something to focus on League of Legends or anything in the future, or esports, we'll be sure to get you back on. So for anybody, if you're looking to keep up to date with the latest betting news, online casino, poker, whatnot, make sure to follow Gambling_com on Twitter, and to check out the Gamblecast SoundCloud page as well, where you can find a lot of recent episodes. Until next time, bye bye.